Across the veteran community, there are many proud and courageous warriors who stepped forward when called and served with honour. They stood strong, with the support of their families and loved ones, sacrificing more than most will ever know. But alongside stories of courage, there are also many families left with eternal heartbreak, struggling just to get through the day, confused, angry, trying to understand how one of their very own has returned so damaged that they end up taking their own life. When survival becomes the cost of service, it has to raise difficult truths about the way we select, train, and support those we send into harm's way. And these aren't isolated cases. To say we are scratching the surface is a huge understatement. And if it isn't addressed, more families will carry the same burden, asking the same painful questions, long after it's too late to change the ending. Maybe it's time to begin a respectful, solutions-focused conversation, not just about whether our recruitment systems are keeping pace, but whether they're genuinely aligned with the kind of recruits coming through today. This isn't about casting blame, it's about recognising that today's generation has been shaped by a different world, one marked by new pressures, shifting cultural values, and a more complex understanding of resilience. Post-service supports like counselling and crisis lines and transitional services are essential. They've helped many, but the rates of veteran suicide remain disturbingly high, and that signals something deeper. So what might we be overlooking? Perhaps the answer lies not just in what happens after service, but far earlier, in how we prepare individuals for the journey in the first place. That preparation can't be limited to physical conditioning. It must include emotional and psychological readiness right from the outset. And it raises a crucial question: could some of that support begin even before training starts? Because strengthening the beginning of the journey may be just as important, perhaps more important, than what's offered at the end. Instead of waiting until discharge to address distress, there's real value in embedding support during recruitment, pre-deployment preparation, and initial training phases. This isn't finger pointing, it's a call for reflection, a chance to ask whether the current systems and structures truly reflect the needs of those they aim to serve. Look, if we're serious about preventing crisis rather than simply reacting to it, then mental readiness needs to be treated with the same rigour we apply to physical readiness. And that means building systems that support the full arc of military life: recruitment, training, operational service, and transition. It means questioning whether our approach is built for today's realities or clinging to models designed for a very different time and a very different kind of soldier. Today's recruits aren't less capable. They're emerging from a world defined by rapid change, emotional complexity, and evolving cultural norms. If institutions fail to evolve with them, it isn't the recruit who are letting the system down. It's the system failing to meet them where they are. And if shifting that mindset helps prevent even one family from enduring the silent grief that too often follows service, then the effort is not only justified, it's necessary. People often ask, what were the warning signs? But that's one of the hardest parts of this issue, because so often there just aren't any. There's a common belief that warning signs will be obvious, that there's a checklist, a set of behaviours or something clear to catch, but trauma doesn't always look the way people expect. Some carry it quietly, some hide it, even from those closest to them, even from themselves. Think of someone like Robin Williams, full of humour and energy, but behind that brightness was a silent battle no one could see. The same silence runs through the veteran community. It can't always be heard, it can't always be seen, but it's there. It's heavy and it often goes unnoticed until it's too late. And that silence isn't just individual, it's cultural. It's built into the structure of military life. Push through, stay strong, don't show weakness. That mindset might keep you alive in combat, but when it comes to mental health, it can be a barrier, a dangerous one, because it teaches people to stay quiet right when they need to speak the most. Yeah, that's a complex question. Support systems like counselling and crisis hotlines and therapy are in place for veterans after service, and they matter. They've helped many. They've saved lives. But despite all of that, the suicide rate remains high. And that suggests something deeper may be going unaddressed. Not just what happens after discharge, but what happens well before it. It would be short-sighted to overlook the recruitment phase, especially how today's recruits are selected and prepared for the emotional and psychological realities of service. In many ways, recruitment is thorough. Physical health, background checks, aptitude testing, these boxes are ticked. So the question is, where might it still be falling short? It's not uncommon that when you're embedded in a system or culture, you stop noticing what's right in front of you. Familiarity, tradition, loyalty, they can blur your view, but sometimes stepping back even slightly brings new clarity. What once seemed normal can reveal gaps that were always there, just overlooked. And I think that's where progress begins. There's a saying, don't just send the ambulance to the bottom of the cliff, build a fence at the top. This isn't about blame, it's about asking whether the foundations we put in place from day one are truly strong enough, or whether we need to reinforce them long before the pressure begins to build. Yeah, look, the numbers are difficult to ignore. Since 1997, 1,395 ex-serving members of the Australian Defence Force have died by suicide. That's more than 3 times the number of Australians lost to combat over the same period. Among ex-serving males, the suicide rate is around 26% higher than the national average. For ex-serving females, it's more than double. The highest risk appears among those medically discharged who die by suicide at a rate of 67 per 100,000, more than 3 times higher than those who left voluntarily. And these are just the official figures. They don't include single vehicle accidents, overdoses, or cases where intent was unclear but widely suspected. Now, it's worth remembering most military recruits begin their careers with above average physical and psychological health. They're typically fitter, stronger, and more resilient than their civilian counterparts. And that's what makes these numbers even more concerning. They suggest that something happens during or after service, something specific to the military experience that contributes to these outcomes. These aren't pre-existing vulnerabilities. These are stresses linked to the nature of the job itself. Of course, suicide is never simple. It's deeply personal, and it's shaped by a web of biological, psychological, social and environmental factors. Military service adds a unique layer to that complexity. But that doesn't mean all veterans experience trauma in the same way. There's a broad diversity of stories, and many transition out of service with strength and purpose. Still, the numbers point to an area where targeted prevention could save lives without taking away from suicide prevention efforts for anyone else. And while statistics help us understand the scope of the problem, they also have limitations. Each number represents a life, a family, a community, a set of hopes and plans that never got to play out. These are losses that don't just disappear. They echo long after the headlines fade. Look, it's fair to say that while the demands of the battlefield have stayed relatively consistent, the social and emotional landscape around those demands has dramatically changed. Today's recruits are shaped by a world that looks very different from the one their predecessors came from. Their experiences, expectations, and stress responses reflect new realities, not better or worse, just different. That isn't a criticism, it's an observation. Many have grown up with less exposure to hardship, greater immersion in digital environments, and new ways of handling challenge and feedback. And these changes raise an important question. Are we preparing them in ways that match who they are, not just who we assume they should be? This shift calls for an updated approach to how resilience is developed, both before and during service. So, psychological screening tools like MMPI-2 or the Big Five inventory have long played a role in assessing fitness for duty. They're useful, but they tend to flag only the most overt indicators, diagnosable conditions, personality traits, high-risk profiles. But what about the subtler traits, things like frustration tolerance, emotional reactivity, or how someone manages stress in a team under pressure? These aren't always picked up, and yet they're often the very traits that determine whether someone thrives, struggles quietly, or ends up in crisis. This isn't about filtering people out, it's about giving them what they need to succeed. If someone has the potential to serve, they also deserve the preparation and support that makes their service sustainable mentally, emotionally, and after they come home. I believe one clear step forward is rethinking how the recruitment process supports mental readiness. Not just meeting enlistment checklists, but truly preparing individuals for the emotional and psychological realities of service. That means using validated screening tools that assess stress tolerance, emotional regulation, and interpersonal resilience, areas that too often go unmeasured, even though they quietly shape the path ahead. It also means embedding mental health education into basic training, not as an afterthought, not as damage control, but as part of the foundation. Recruits should leave training not only physically fit, but mentally equipped. They should know how to recognise strain, how to manage it, and how to ask for help before the pressure breaks them. Resilience isn't just about pushing through. It's also about recovering, adapting, and staying grounded when things go wrong. These aren't soft skills, they're survival tools, and they're every bit as critical as marksmanship or fitness drills. Support shouldn't start at discharge, it should be woven through the entire journey. Transition planning, peer mentoring, and ongoing mental health check-ins should be part of active service, not something we scramble to offer once someone's already in free fall. Because veteran suicide is not just a statistic, it's a signal. A warning that something in the system isn't holding up its end, and if something needs to change, it shouldn't start after the crisis. It should start before the first salute, before the uniform goes on, before the mission begins. Service should never come at the cost of survival. If we can do more, and we can, then it's time we do. It's time to do better.